All right, today in class, we're going to be working on kind of our most complex still lifes or landscape paintings so far. And we're going to be working on this concept of creating a little building in a wooded situation. And we're going to talk about painting light colored bark trees. So like trees that are aspen or birch, the kind of trees that we have in Minnesota quite frequently, where they have a light colored bark instead of a dark colored bark. And this is, again, my sketchbook paper. So you can see I have the fold here. I have my paper prepped here. So I have my sketchbook sheet taped to my board. You can see the little dangle extra bit. And I am all ready to go ahead and do these two landscapes. Now, these two are a little more complicated because unlike last week I started with landscape that was already there, right? So my sky and my ground were already painted, and all I did was go in and add trees. Today, instead of just being able to add trees to something that's already dry, I do have to start with everything being wet. And so that means what's going to happen today is I'm going to paint on one and then switch and paint on the other, and we're going to paint back and forth until both landscapes are finished. So that's just something for you to keep in mind as we will paint back and forth, paint back and forth. So you just need to be ready to do that. One other thing is this will be the first time that we're going to use a little bit of a pencil. And what I'm going to do is I just want the space for my birch trees. So I'm going to just outline where those three trees are on my paper, and then we're going to draw a really simple cabin. So those are our missions. So I'm going to go ahead and paint or just draw these three birch trees. Birch and aspen both tend to grow in clumps. So you'll see I'm going to draw my three trees kind of together up off the bottom of the sheet and just sort of in a little grouping. Okay, so that's part number one. The reason we draw the trees first is we're going to paint around the trees to make this landscape. The other thing I'm going to do is draw a little cabin over here on the side. Now, I very often don't draw the whole cabin. I like some of it to go off the sheet. So what I'm going to do is just draw part of a cabin. So I'm going to draw the triangle that will be the peak of the cabin's roof. And I'm going to have this half of the triangle come just a little bit lower because this is the part of the cabin that's closest to me. So triangle first. I am going to draw a straight line to the edge and a straight line to the edge. This will be the like the front part of the roof of the cabin. And then here I want there to be like an eave. I'm going to draw a straight line down. I'll connect this. And this about right here, straight line down. And there we go. Ta-da, I have my cabin. The rest will paint. So if you want to see like what a whole cabin looks like, so that's me drawing the cabin so that goes off the sheet. What I'm doing is drawing just the peak of the roof first. And then these two lines will be even with each other, so parallel. And now this line and this line will be parallel. And then I would draw these walls. I like to get a little peak in here, and then this wall. So it's just a little rustic like shed. We're not going to put doors, we're not going to put windows. It's just a very simple little like abandoned building. Okay, so that is how you draw that. So that's just what you're going to do first. You can draw the whole thing if you want. You can just draw part of it like I have and have it go off the paper. You can see this time I drew it a little smaller, this time it's a little bigger. They end up a little different every time. That's totally fine. Okay, so I have my forest, I have my cabin that will be in the forest, and we're gonna go ahead and start painting. So in order to start painting, I wanna make sure I have paper towel handy so that I can be ready to make some clouds if I decide that I need clouds. I'm gonna start over here on my like cabin in the woods, and I'm just gonna grab some blue. Remember we talked last week about the caliber of the blue shows us what kind of day it is. So the brighter the blue, the more sunny the weather. I am going to use kind of a grayish blue because that's what I have on my palette. So I'm going to start dark at the top, and I'm going to go ahead and just gradually add some water as I come down towards my cabin. And I'm going to go ahead and paint sky like part way down the roof of the cabin. Even though I know I'm going to fill this in with trees, it's easier for me to paint the trees over the sky than it is for me to try to fix the sky if my trees don't go tall enough. I have kind of a stripy mess in my sky right now, which is fine because I'm going to lift out a few clouds in my sky. Just some texture. Reminder that from like last week, we can also come back and kind of redefine those clouds after we've paper toweled them in, just to kind of give the cloud structure a little bit more depth. So I'm just coming back, putting in a few shadows in between my layers of clouds, just so they feel a little bit more finished and a little more defined. So I can also come back with my squeezed paintbrush and soften some of those edges, or I can come back in with paper towel again as well to give it more texture. So a little bit of cloudy day. We are going to let that dry. Okay. I am now going to do the exact same thing on this other foresty landscape. I'm going to start with my sky. So I'm going to use the same kind of gray blue, just because I have it mixed up and ready to go. We're going to paint for a little longer on this because most of this is just kind of some wet into wet paint mixing. The trick of it is I need to just paint around where I painted these trees. So I'm gonna paint my sky color in here in between my tree gaps. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just cleaned off my paintbrush a little bit. It's kind of evenly dark. So I'm just getting this a little wet. I'm gonna go back in here, add some clouds, just because I kind of like that textured sky effect. While this is still wet now, I am going to mix up kind of a backgroundy green. So it's a grayish green, and I'm just gonna go ahead and right now, while my sky is wet, I'm going to keep painting. What's gonna happen is this like background forest is a lot of wet into wet paint. So you can see I'm kind of putting a little bit of leaf texture up here, not a lot of details, but I am painting with kind of a murky gray green. I'm gonna get this a little greener as I go. Remembering that I can totally change the season if I change the color. So if I want this to be fall, I'm going to use reds and oranges and browns and kind of some goldeny colors. more of a spring or summer effect, I'm going to keep it more green. Spring is kind of more of a yellow green kind of an event. Go ahead and I'm gonna just paint. Just let it all just kind of blur together. Continuing to paint around those tree trunk spaces that we put in here. Going to go ahead now and mix up something that's a little more gray or brown and add it in. I'm heading towards the bottoms of these trunks, and so I have to start thinking about getting to the forest floor. So I have mixed up some of my orangey red, my cad red, and my phthalo blue to make kind of a gray brown sort of color. And I've hit between here, so I can go ahead. These guys are done. This gap is done anyway, so I don't have to paint there anymore. One sort of background forest detail that I can do if I like is to go ahead, and if we remember back when I showed you you can put grass detail, and I can flip my paintbrush over and I can put in like what they end up feeling like a little bit is like some shrubs or branch detail back here. I don't need to go overboard with that. Just because remember, once it's on there, I can't get it off. So if I hate it later, it's there forever. It doesn't matter if I hate it or not. So I'm just gonna do it on 2 of those sides. And now I am wanting to kind of move forward with my kind of more ground feeling. So oh, that got a little purpley. Oh well, that's fine. And I'm gonna go ahead and just keep painting. So you can see I'm gonna keep going around these trees. Remember, brown is that kind of orangey red with the blue that's next to the green. And that will give me kind of a forest floor effect. Dirt, rocks, that kind of thing. I also want to include some of these colors that I've used in the back because that is like kind of the season that we're in. And so I'm reusing some of my greens, some of my other colors down here as I paint my way forward as well. Just because it'll give my painting some unity. I don't want to keep painting with different colors the whole time. And so it'll bring some of these colors from the back of my forest up here into the front of my forest. And I made this kind of purpley color, so I'm going to go ahead and keep with that too. And mixing that with the yellow is going to also give me some browns. So I painted the entirety of this sheet, just ignoring or painting around what I want to be a light colored bark tree. I can, if I want, take some paper towel and just lift some areas down here on the forest floor so that I have some texture and a few areas that are a little bit lighter. Those lighter areas will end up feeling a little like dappled sunshine. Now this guy needs to dry. So we painted this all the way from the sky through the background into the ground. We're gonna allow that to dry and we're gonna switch back to our cabin in the woods. I am going to use kind of a murky green, a backgroundy color of green. So I do that with the green and a little bit of the red, just so I have a really dull green. I am going to, if I think back to when we first learned about painting trees, we painted trees in the far distance and we painted them just as lumps. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just outline with some paint the edge of my cabin. And I want there to look like there are trees behind my cabin. I'm gonna give it a pine tree here too. So those would be the very tops of some trees behind this cabin. And as I work my way forward here, these will start to feel like trees that are next to the cabin. So you can see, because I've got sky back there, I can skip some sky holes that will all work out. And depending, I can put as many or as few trees as I want back here. So you can see I placed a couple of pine trees in, and now I'm gonna have this level come down a little bit, which is fine. And I'm going to, as we move forward now, I can go ahead and brighten up that green. So I can grab a little bit more of the green and mix it in with the green that I was already using, just so that it brightens up a little. Make it a little darker. I'm going to want to come back and like darken my pine tree a little. So while that's still a little damp, I'm gonna go ahead and put in, so just like last week when we painted and we let those colors mix together. So I'm just putting in a little depth of color on that edge of that pine tree. I'm also gonna bring the edge of that pine tree down so that it feels like it goes just behind the cabin here. So make a little bit darker edge. And I want my tree to feel like it stops. Not quite at the bottom of the cabin, but you can see that it feels like a really big pine tree now. Go ahead and make this a little darker here too. And I can continue with this color and leave this part here, but I'm gonna go ahead and continue some like lump trees. It's the official term for that. And I can make some smaller trees here that go in front of those trees that are in the distance. And those could start to get a little greener. So I just pop a little bit of green, more green in there. And now what I'm gonna do is just clean my paintbrush out. So I cleaned it out, I squeezed it dry, and I'm just gonna pull some of this down and start to think really a little bit about the grass or the ground that's in front of this cabin. So I can grab a little bit more like yellow, mix that in down here at the front while it's fresh. And you can see I didn't go all the way to the edge of the cabin because I want to try to paint the cabin gray before we switch back to the other landscape. So I wanted to skip a little section here so that I can paint my cabin a little bit of gray. So we're gonna make a gray using this blue, which is the phthalo blue, and this, the cad red, the orangey red. I'm just gonna mix those two together until I have something that feels really black. And then I'm just gonna use a lot of water. Okay, so a lot of water. If I put a stripe on here and it feels really, really dark, I'm just gonna grab more water. And I'm gonna go ahead and just paint the entire cabin here. I will have to decide which side of the cabin is my shadow side and which side of the cabin is my highlight side. And I think this side will probably be my shadow side. But you can see I've painted both sides right now that same color gray. If I want, I can squeeze my paintbrush out and I can add like some little like plank detail, either vertically or horizontally. Like you can see when you squeeze your paintbrush out, what happens is it becomes like a little paint vacuum. And all I'm doing that for is just for effect. You can also see that this color of paint, these two kind of granulate and they make a really good like rustic cabin. And I'm going to pull this shadow color, this is gonna be the shadowed side of my cabin is gonna be casting a shadow on the ground. So I'm just gonna pull that down. And now we're at the point there with that cabin that we have to let that dry again before I can darken the side of the cabin and paint the roof, and then we'll talk about the ground. My birch tree situation is feeling pretty good over here. It's not wet. So we're gonna go ahead and paint the trees. Even though these trees are light in color, they still have color on the bark, so they're not perfectly white. So you can see, if I show you a couple of these that are painted already, that you can see that they have some variation on their trunk. And so that's what we're gonna paint next. So I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit of a shadow color mixed up. And I'm gonna use this same gray from the side of my cabin. And I have a yellow mixed up as well. So I'm using my golden yellow so that I have a golden yellow, which I called my sunshine color, and I have my shadow color. So here's what I'm gonna do is I just need to get the center or the surface of my tree wet. I don't want it like super soupy, but I am going to wet down the middle all the way to the edge of this tree. The next thing I have to do is kind of decide in my mind is where the sun is coming from. So is my sun coming from the left side or is my sun coming from the right side? It's 100% up to you. The sun is going to be more vibrant on the trunks of the trees up here above the tree, above where the underbrush is. So I'm going to go ahead and take my golden yellow and I'm just going to go right down the side of this trunk. And you can see, because my paint is wet, that golden paint is not going to stay in one spot, but it's going to drift across the trunk itself. I'm going to run out of yellow as I come to the bottom, and that's fine because the sun is going to hit the trunk at the top more than the bottom. I'm going to do the same thing now with my shadowy color, but I'm going to start at the bottom. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom of my tree, and I'm going to work my way up on just that opposite side of the tree trunk. Those colors are going to blend and mix together as they dry. Again, I'm going to run out of paint kind of on the way up the trunk, and that's going to be okay. And I'm just going to let that blend together. Now, this kind of tree will also sometimes have mars or scars, darker areas along the trunk. And I'm going to just go ahead and put those in while the paint is sort of wet so that they can drift a little bit into the paint that I've already got there, so they don't end up really distinct or looking awkward. If I decide that I have too much paint on here, what I can do is clean my paintbrush off. I can squeeze it dry, and I can use my squeeze dry paintbrush to kind of clean some of this paint off, because a squeeze dry paintbrush will take paint off of a paper instead of put paint on. So you can see I kind of pulled a little bit of that color off the trunk there, but I'm mostly just gonna leave that to do what it's gonna do. I am now gonna switch to the next trunk and do the exact same process. So I'm gonna put some water down the center. I've decided which side is my sunny side. So for this painting, the sunny side is over here on the left. So I'm gonna go ahead, just put my stripe of sunny colored paint on the left-hand side of this trunk, kind of running out as I get to the bottom, and that's okay because we're gonna have more light, more sun up top. I'm gonna switch now to my shadow color, starting at the bottom with my shadow color and just letting those colors mix together in that little pool of paint because I got the tree trunk wet first. And I can go ahead and make some of those extra marks. Trunk at the bottom can sometimes be a little more colorful, more darker areas. Again, too, if I find that I need to lighten that up, I can squeeze my paintbrush out after I've cleaned it, and I can go ahead and I can pull some of that paint off of the trunk so that it kind of blends together. Last tree trunk, again, a little bit of water down the entire length of the tree. Going to use my sunny color on the left. My shadow color on the right. Oops, start down at the bottom. So I have more paint down here where it's going to be more shadowed. Gradually a little bit less as I move towards the top. I can, like I said, make some of those darker marks as it goes across the trunk. Make this bottom section just a little darker. So it's going to be shadowed down here in the forest. And again, I can squeeze my paintbrush dry and just pull off some lighter sections, kind of soften and blend that stripey effect off of there. Okay, so now even though my trees are light colored, they now have color and shadow and highlight on them. While I'm painting this, I've decided, right, that this is the shadowed side of my tree. So I'm gonna go ahead and give the shadowed side of my forest floor a shadow. So I'm gonna go right here at the base of my tree, and I'm gonna pull that shadow color out and into my landscape a little bit. So I'm shadowing the base of the tree and I'm pulling that color this way. Now I'm gonna hit this side of my tree, and then the shadow is going to continue on this other side as they move away from the tree. And this is that same color gray that I was using. As they move away from the tree, they'll kind of lighten up, so I just added a little bit of blue. But that gives my trees some shadow, adds a little depth into my forest. Again, I can add some sun dapple using my paper towel. Just trying to soften in the edges a little bit so they don't look so harsh. And make sure that I don't have any little white gaps. So pushing that into the bottom of my tree. I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry now before we add the branches and the leaves. I'm gonna switch over here because my cabin is pretty dry. I'm gonna go ahead and take some lighter gray and paint the roof. So this is that same color gray that I painted the whole cabin with, but more water. While I wait for my roof to dry before we add some more shadows in, I'm gonna come down here and work on a little bit more of the ground in front of my cabin. So I can take some more green. Always mixing it with a little bit of blue and a little bit of red just to make the color less just right from the tray. And what I can do now is I can make this cabin have shrubs in front of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint right over this section of my cabin. I'm gonna give it a whole line of like shrubs here that go right in front of this bottom edge. Yeah, I think that looks good. I'm gonna take my paintbrush, I cleaned it out, and I'm gonna just blend this in. So I'm gonna go ahead and blend this along the bottom section. I'm gonna blend it this way a little bit. My roof line feels fairly dry, so I'm gonna go ahead and mix up some more of that gray with the blue and the orangey red. What I'm gonna do with this is just give my cabin some dimension. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint it here under the roof line. And I'm gonna pull that down a little. I'm also gonna paint that same color back here. Oops, the roof is too wet. So I'm gonna clean my paintbrush out, squeeze it dry, just skip that spot for right now. So I have my clean, dry paintbrush, and I'm just gonna pull this color down. You can see that that's gonna give us some nice shadow on this side of my cabin. And I'm gonna pull that right down into the grass so that that whole side is shadowed. We'll come back to this. I'm gonna paint this ledge that same color so that it also looks shadowed. See if I can sneak it up here. There we go. It's a little wet up at that top edge. So if you ever go to paint and it's wetter than you think it is, you can just always grab your paper towel, grab your paintbrush, squeeze it dry. I'm gonna go ahead and blend this a little down again, just so it's not such a hard line. Again, I can leave it a little textured. So you can see that that gives me the effect of having a more three-dimensional kind of cabin. I can do a similar thing now down here, so I could switch to something a little more yellow. And I can give my kind of cabin one more row of like vegetation down here. This is sort of a abandoned cabin in the woods kind of a feel, where we don't really, there's no road to come in. Nothing's really been done to this cabin in a while. I can give it more green here so that this feels like it's together. You can see that this just starts to feel a little abandoned feeling. That's kind of the effect we're going for. We want to have this feel like nobody's been here in a while. Always blend those little landscape layers together. If I want, I can go ahead and do a few of these kind of branchy sort of things. Gives you an undergrowth kind of feel. Just a couple. And there you go, cabin in the woods. Kind of a fun little guy. You can see I have left some layers there, kind of hints at the idea that there might be more than one layer of bushes or plants. No doors, no windows, just kind of abandoned cabin in the woods. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the branches on this other one. I'm gonna add a little bit more orange to that blue-gray. Add some water. And these trees have primarily branches at the top. And then remember, we can practice making really skinny lines first. on our paper. And I'm not going to put too many branches on. Kind of think that they look a little better with less branches a lot of times. I'm going to overlap a couple of the branches. I can have a branch start on the tree and then come forward. If I ever feel like they get too dark, I can take my paper towel and I can just kind of soften that up a little bit so that the transition isn't so hard, so that that's not so completely dark. I want this tree to feel like it's in the front. So I'm going to give it a couple extra branches. So you can see not a lot of branches, mostly just going to leave it branch free. So I've given 6-8 branches. I can give them, lighten up the dark a little bit. And the final step here is going to be to add some leaves. So I'm going to do like I did last week, and I'm going to flip my paper over. I am going to place my palette so that it's on top of my other little painting. If it's not too wet, I want to make sure that I block that. And I'm just going to splash some leaves up here at the top. So I'm going to take my green, maybe mix it with a little bit of the yellow just to brighten it up. And I'm going to have enough paint so that my paintbrush feels kind of drippy. And then what I'm going to do is just splatter up here on this top section some leaves. And now I can also go and I can just bump those so that they bump a little bit bigger and we get a leaf effect, but we still see lots of the sky through our trees. Grab a little extra paint so that these don't feel too transparent. But you can see I'm going to put some right in front of my trunks. Even though I don't have branches there, it's fine. It will look great. So there you go. I can also just I can do the same thing and add with just yellow. So I can add a little bit of just highlight. So I'm just popping a little bit of yellow paint in just so we get a little like highlight texture in our leaf canopy. And that one is also finished. So there you go. We painted our forest and cabin today. Hopefully you had a good time.